The ColorSlice tool is Resolve's newest color grading tool. And whether I'm grading a feature or a commercial or a streaming series, I'm using this tool all the time in my professional color grading practice these days. In this video, I'm going to show you how I'm using it, break down the way that it works so that you understand it inside and out, and I'm going to reveal the one thing that I would never use the ColorSlice tool for. Okay, let's dive into Resolve here and get our hands on this tool. So first things first, let's get our bearings. Let's get oriented a little bit in terms of the way this tool is set up and what it's designed to do. So the ColorSlice tool is really designed to manipulate just three things for us. Those three things, those three image attributes are density, saturation, and hue. And that's really it. It's just those three things that we are adjusting when we work with the ColorSlice tool. And where the power of this tool comes in is that we can manipulate those things not only on an overall basis, that's what these knobs are for up here, density, saturation, and hue, but also on the basis of individual hues. So we've got these 7 hues that have been defined: red, skin, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta, where we can control those same things: density, saturation, and hue. So that's a good overview of the tool, and it's also a good sort of window into how much there really is to learn here. There's not as much to learn as it might look like when you first lay eyes on this UI. When you look at it at first, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? That's a lot of colors, a lot of knobs, a lot of sliders, but it's a lot less overwhelming when you realize, oh, once I understand what to do here in my reds, for example, the same logic, the same sliders are going to apply with skin, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta. So there's not as much to learn as it might look like initially. But before we even dive into manipulating things on an individual basis of these individual hues, I want to talk about one of the first things that I love to use this tool for, and that's to make global adjustments, specifically the global adjustment of saturation. I love this saturation knob right here in the ColorSlice tool. It is way better than any other saturation operator anywhere else inside of Resolve. Let me show you what I mean. Let's take a look at our primaries for a second here. I'm going to go back to my primaries and I'm just going to work my good old-fashioned like OG primary saturation knob down here at the bottom. That's this guy right here. I'm just adjusting it with my control surface. And I'm going to go top floor, okay? Let's grab a still of that, reset that, and I'm now going to go back to the ColorSlice tool and work the saturation tool within ColorSlice and do a sort of similar level of strength, all right? Now let's wipe, let's compare. So right now we're looking at ColorSlice saturation. This is primary saturation. ColorSlice saturation, primary saturation. Big difference, right? These really don't look the same at all, especially in highly colorful areas, such as in this woman's lips or in the warm accent there in the background. There's really quite a big difference in what's going on. And the fundamental difference is this: the model that ColorSlice is using is a totally different model than anywhere else inside of Resolve. It is a model that is respecting the way that light and color work out in the real world. If we think about her lips for a moment as something that has a certain amount of color, and we think about with a saturation adjustment wanting to increase that amount of color, make it seem as if her lips or her lipstick had more color, what would be involved in that? Essentially, more color, a more pure color, means that less light is being reflected. It means that light is being reflected more selectively off of that particular surface. So by definition, it will be darker than a less saturated version of that same color. That's a very basic principle of physical light that is very often overlooked in color correction style saturation adjustments, including everywhere throughout Resolve where we do sat adjustments. Most of the time we're getting this video style saturation that we see here with our primary sat adjustment, where we're increasing color and the luminance of the image starts to go up as well. And it just feels inorganic and weird and really imposed, right? As opposed to what we're getting here with ColorSlice, which even at this increased strength that I wouldn't want to actually go to in a real world grade, it still has a certain physical reality to it, or organic quality to it, or even filmic quality, if you want to call it that, because of the nature of the model. And this is really what people are referring to when they talk about subtractive saturation. It's saturation that is causing you to lose luminance as you increase saturation. So I love this saturation knob right within ColorSlice. It is 100% my go-to knob for adjusting saturation when I'm grading things shot by shot. And what's fun about doing these adjustments in the ColorSlice tool is I can seamlessly flow into starting to refine my work when it comes to saturation. So if we use the example here of saying, I really like what's happening, but I wish that I wasn't seeing so much of a response in that warm accent in the background. All I have to do is take my saturation depth and turn it to the left a little bit, twist it negative. Well, what am I doing there? Why is that working? Why is that allowing less color to hit that area of the image? Saturation depth is a way of saying, what luminance area are you centering your saturation operation around? At 0, you're centering around the middle area of the image. As you start to pull your depth down, it's more centered around the low end of the image, meaning you're going to have more effect in your shadows and less effect in your high end. If I go the opposite direction, turn it to the right, I'm now going to start having more effect in my high end and less effect in the low end. So this is something I don't break out on every shot, but it's a great finesse to have available when I want to do things like I just did, to say like, hey, let's like control how much of that is whacking the accent light back there and have it be more focused on the lower luminance areas, such as my subject's face and the area in the front of that background, essentially, right? And it doesn't stop there, because in addition to making that kind of finesse, I can also seamlessly start moving into adjusting saturation per hue as opposed to overall saturation. So let's say for the sake of this example, this is looking decent to me, but I feel like I've kind of gone a little too far with my skin tones by saturating this much. So I'm going to back off that saturation a little bit and say that's as far as I want to go with my skin tones, but I do feel like the cool areas of my background could afford to take on more saturation. How am I going to do that? All I'm going to do is go to my cyan saturation and start to increase it. And you can see that's this bar right here that I'm turning up using my knob here. And I'm now getting more saturation in the image just in that cyan region. So this is a really cool way that allows me to move from, okay, what's my global kind of foundational saturation, and seamlessly flow into making more nuanced, finessed, localized saturation adjustments, and ending up with something like we see here, which is a really big hit of overall saturation that has been sort of dialed in to the needs of this particular shot. So that's one thing I'm using ColorSlice for all the time, is global saturation operations, tuning them with saturation depth when I need to, and then marrying that with hue-based saturation adjustments so that I'm only adjusting the saturation at particular hue angles. Another thing that I'm using all the time here in the ColorSlice tool, let's take a look at another shot. I'm going to scrub forward here, let this guy kind of find the daylight. And what I want to do now is create a new serial node, and I'm going to once again increase my overall saturation. Gosh, that looks good. So much better than I'm used to seeing from a saturation knob inside of Resolve. And what I want to do now is play with my color density. Now, I talked about density right at the beginning of this video, and density is a topic that's being discussed quite a bit out there in color grading circles, but I want to talk about what that actually means for a second. What color density means is that you are changing luminance or brightness, or in some cases exposure, on the basis of saturation. Okay, so it's essentially an inverse relationship where as saturation goes up, luminance or exposure starts to go down. It's a really great way of creating depth and controlling color contrast in the image. And prior to ColorSlice, there really wasn't a great means of implementing color density into the image. So if I grab my just global density adjustment here and turn it to the right, let's zoom in and look at my dude's face here, for example. So here's with density, here's no density. You can see the colorful areas of the image are becoming darker, right? Meanwhile, if I look at less colorful areas of the image, like this white wall, or not white wall, but this kind of beigeish wall that is quite low in saturation, not as much is happening with this density adjustment because there's not as much color in that wall. So what we often call color density, or simply density, I tend to like to think of as saturation versus exposure, or saturation versus luminance. That's really what we're controlling, and the ColorSlice tool gives us a new way of exerting that control that we really didn't have before. Closest we could have come before, like let's zoom out here and take a look at what we've got currently. So this is our saturation plus density adjustment. Let's grab a still of this and add a new serial node and disable this for now. And let's say we want to try to accomplish something similar without ColorSlice. The closest we could have come before would be to increase our primary saturation. If we go over here and juice that up, like so, and then go over to our curves and work our sat versus lume. And sat versus lume, I've got low saturation to high saturation on this horizontal x-axis, and I've got low luminance to high luminance on this vertical or y-axis, okay? So if we put those things together, that means that if I grab this control point and drop it down, I will be decreasing the luminance of the image at high saturations. And if we zoom in here, we can kind of wipe in between the two scenarios. Here's ColorSlice. Here's our non-ColorSlice version of things, the best available prior to ColorSlice. This is the right idea, this one that we just built, but it just doesn't look as good as the ColorSlice version. ColorSlice version feels more filmic, feels more organic. It's just a better tool for accomplishing the task. So this is something else I'm using ColorSlice for all the time. And just like we talked about with our saturation adjustments, if we look at something like shot number 3 here, I can seamlessly flow from adjusting my overall density to adjusting density at a particular hue. So if we take a look at our ColorSlice at our reds, for example, here, and increase my red density, which is made with this bar right here, and I start to crank that up, look at that response. That feels really, really good. This is a layer beyond or a level beyond what we were even able to do a moment ago with our sat versus lume married to our saturation that I was just working. This is something you really couldn't do cleanly or quickly at all in Resolve prior to ColorSlice. And I think this looks great. This is something that I'm looking to shape in my images all the time that I was so excited to see implemented here in the ColorSlice tool. So same thing here. We've got global density, and then that can seamlessly flow into adjusting density for a particular hue angle, in this case in my reds, okay? Okay, from here, let's talk about something that I mentioned right at the beginning of this video, something that I would not ever use the ColorSlice tool for. What we've done thus far, the things that we've been playing with, the ingredients that we've been playing with, and the attributes that we've been manipulating, these are often things that we are looking to sort of shape and dial in when we're building an overall look, right? And by the way, we don't even have an overall look in place right now, but if we were looking to build one, we would probably be looking to shape things like saturation that feels more organic or more filmic, color density that causes colors that are higher in saturation to carry more weight and perhaps feel a bit more filmic as well. So it can be tempting to think of the ColorSlice tool as a potential look development tool. Say, hey, like, can I use this tool to get these characteristics built into my overall look? My answer is definitely no, and I'm going to show you why right now. So check this out. This red density operation right here, that's looking pretty darn clean, right? I'm not seeing any artifacting or problems in the image when I flip this off and on. But let's go up to our next shot here, to shot number 4. And I'm going to zoom in on my subject's face here, and I'm just going to paste the exact same grade. We can go in even further. In general, it looks okay, but if I start to adjust this, make it a little bit easier to see, you can see I've got all these little splotches and artifacts coming into the image here, right? This is the type of stuff that we want to look out for really, really closely in our looks and in our look development tools, because if we get something that feels right, seems like it's doing the job, and we start grading underneath it and we get 10 shots, 50 shots, 1,000 shots into a grade underneath a look that's built with a tool that does something like this, we can find ourselves on shot 1,000 looking at a really artifact, like infected image and not having any great quick recourse for what to do. We've got to go and find a way to rebuild our look inside of that tool in a better way, or even more likely, we might have to switch to a completely different look development tool or a different look when we're halfway through a grade. That's something we want to avoid. That's why I put such a high premium on my look dev tools being as clean as possible. That's why there's a much higher bar for a look dev tool than there is for a color grading tool. I think as a color grading tool, ColorSlice does a really nice job, and it actually is pretty clean by the standards of a color grading tool. Because if it goes too far, if I'm doing this on the shot level, I can say, well, maybe I just went too far. I'm not going to push it as hard or find another way to get what I'm after, because it's just one shot. But if we're talking about an entire look for an entire film or a series, the bar gets much higher, and it's a bar that ColorSlice does not pass. And in fact, it's not one that ColorSlice was designed to pass. ColorSlice is designed to be a color grading tool, not a look development tool. So I would never confuse one with the other and be tempted to use ColorSlice for my look development practice. Let's just look at another example here on shot number 5. I'm going to once again paste the same grade, and let's look at the fill side of my subject's face here. A lot of chatter going on right there, right? Now, here's what's interesting. This points to what I think is the other kind of biggest miss of the ColorSlice tool. I'm a big fan of this tool. If you're not clear on that already, I really like the functionality that it offers, and there's a lot of good stuff to say about the tool. One of the things that I think is a big compromise here that should not have been implemented in the way that it has been is this guy right here, the skin vector. We've got RGB CMY, that makes perfect sense. And if you look at the pie slices for red, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and magenta, those are like good pieces of the pizza. If I was hungry and going for some pizza, I would want this slice. I would not want this skin slice, which is about half the size of these other slices. The challenge is this. We all want tools for refining skin tone. It's something that we're all looking to do. We're all looking to get our skin tones feeling as good as possible. Skin tone really, really matters to us as human observers and certainly as colorists. The problem is that on a colorimetric basis, colorimetric meaning measurement of color, skin tone is not particularly well separated from reds and yellows. It's just a subset within there. So there's no easy way to separate it out from red and yellow. And what's happening in this case is the direct result of this skin tone vector just existing. I'm not even doing anything within it right now, but the fact that it exists is one of the reasons why I'm getting this chatter over here. Check out what I mean. If I go over here to my center slider within my skin vector, which essentially allows me to define where is the center of this pie slice? Where do you want me to look for skin tones or look for reds or look for yellows or whatever it might be? If I grab this center slider and I just move it to the right, and as I do this, it's kind of small, but you can see this little sort of bold white line moving counterclockwise. As I do this, you're going to see things clean up over here, right? Well, why in the heck is that? I'm not even doing anything with the skin tone vector. The reason is simple. This is the exact reason why I feel like the skin tone vector was a mistake. If you're going to make a skin tone vector, that means that when you're adjusting red and yellow, that can't be allowed to disturb whatever is in this little skin pizza slice, right? Otherwise, you're making adjustments to the skin tone vector when you're trying to adjust something else. So the reason this is happening is because my red is hitting an edge sooner than it should, because there has to be room left for the skin tone vector to preserve, to kind of hold those areas of the image that, again, are not particularly well defined. They're not as broad and big as saying something like red or yellow. So even when we're not directly manipulating the skin tone vector, we can get compromised results, especially or specifically in our reds and yellows, because these surround that skin tone pie slice, and they have to stop around that skin tone pie slice because the skin tone pie slice is there in the first place. So that's not the only cause of some of the chatter and noise and problems that I see with some operations that we perform in ColorSlice, but it's one of the big ones. So what does that mean? Well, as I said, that means A, we shouldn't use ColorSlice as a look development tool. We should use it as it was intended, as a color grading tool. That means B, we probably shouldn't be playing with this skin tone vector at all. At least I don't in my practice, because it's too narrow to get nice, smooth, clean operations. And finally, it means if we're getting problematic results or noisy results in adjustments to our reds or our yellows, one really easy fix can be to move the skin tone vector as far out of the way as possible. So if I'm working my reds and my reds are getting noisy, like I was seeing here, move that skin tone all the way to the right. Conversely, if I'm working my yellows and they're getting noisy, I would move this center point all the way to the left, okay? So that's kind of our overall overview of the ColorSlice tool. Again, we've got our global controls up here, density, saturation, and hue, and then we have density, saturation, and hue for each of our hue angles. And that's really the whole ball game right there. That's the fundamentals of the tool right there. There are some additional features in here, some we talked about, such as our saturation depth. The density depth has the exact same logic to it that the saturation depth does. Saturation balance is effectively just going to allow you to control how deep your saturations are going when you increase saturation. So if I go really strong with my sat and I look at this saturation balance, it's really just controlling how subtractive is that saturation, okay? So that's at least a quick overview of all of the different knobs and sliders and adjustments here within ColorSlice. And I hope you found as we've gone through this that it's not as overwhelming and as complex as it might have seemed initially, and that it's a really powerful tool and a great way to get what we're after in terms of manipulating our individual images at the grading shot level on the basis of hue, color density, and saturation, either globally or at these various skin tone vectors.